Imagine a world where the fate of an accusation, the very truth of a claim, wasn't decided by evidence or witness testimony, but by the clash of steel, by blood spilled on hallowed ground. This was the terrifying reality of medieval trial by combat, an ordeal woven deep into the fabric of ancient justice systems. Far from the romanticized duels of fiction, these were solemn, often brutal affairs, believed to be the ultimate arbitration of God himself. But how did these terrifying contests truly work? Who was allowed to fight? What were the stakes? And perhaps most importantly, who actually emerged victorious from these crucible tests of divine will? Step back into a time where life, liberty, and truth hung on the edge of a blade. In the chaotic tapestry of the Middle Ages, legal systems were often rudimentary. Without modern forensics or extensive investigative techniques, cultures across Europe, from the Germanic tribes to Norman England, turned to a concept known as ordeal. This wasn't just a physical test. It was a profound appeal to the divine. The belief was simple yet terrifying. God would intervene to reveal the righteous. Trial by combat, or wager of battle, stood as one of the most dramatic and final forms of ordeal. It wasn't merely a fight. It was a sacred duel, a petition for heavenly judgment to expose perjury or validate an accusation, making it a cornerstone of justice in a deeply religious age. Unlike spontaneous brawls or duels of honor, trial by combat was a formal, legally sanctioned event, often overseen by judges or a lord. It wasn't for every dispute, but typically reserved for serious allegations like treason, murder, or accusations of false witness where no other proof sufficed. The stakes were absolute: innocence or guilt, life or death. The combatants weren't fighting for pride, but for the very truth, with their souls potentially on the line. This distinction elevated it from a mere test of martial skill to a profound, public spectacle designed to reveal God's definitive judgment, cementing its unique place in the legal landscape. The right to demand trial by combat wasn't universal. It was usually reserved for freemen, those not bound by serfdom. Women, the elderly, children, the infirm, and even the clergy were typically exempt from fighting themselves. Yet, their rights were still protected. If accused or an accuser, they could often appoint a champion to fight on their behalf. This provision ensured that even the most vulnerable in society could access this form of divine justice, albeit through a proxy. This system, while seemingly brutal, aimed to provide an avenue for justice where other forms of proof were unattainable or insufficient. In a trial by combat, both parties swore solemn oaths before God and the court, affirming the truth of their claims. The accuser would swear their accusation was true, and the accused would swear their innocence. It was a perilous moment, for to swear falsely was a grave sin, believed to invoke God's wrath, regardless of the outcome of the fight. The burden of proof essentially shifted to the combat itself. The victor was deemed righteous by divine intervention. This initial oath-taking ritual underscored the profound spiritual dimension embedded within every aspect of the wager of battle, setting the stage for the dramatic confrontation to follow. For those unable or unwilling to fight, be it due to status, age, gender, or physical infirmity, professional champions became vital. These were often seasoned fighters, skilled and experienced, hired to represent a party. Their role was not merely to win, but to fight as if the truth were their own. The champion's defeat meant the defeat of the person they represented, with all the legal and social consequences. This system introduced an intriguing dynamic. Was it God judging the champion's skill or the champion's patron's truth? These men were a peculiar, often feared class, whose fortunes rose and fell with the swing of a sword. The setting for trial by combat was often especially designated lists or enclosed courtyard, hallowed and purified for the occasion. The atmosphere was thick with tension and religious solemnity. Spectators, including nobles, clergy, and common folk, gathered to witness God's judgment unfold. Priests would offer prayers, and elaborate rituals were performed to consecrate the ground and the weapons, ensuring the purity of the divine intervention. This wasn't a casual spectacle. It was a deeply symbolic and terrifying theatrical performance, reinforcing the gravity of the proceedings and the pervasive belief in divine oversight. The weapons used in trial by combat were often specific to the jurisdiction or case. While tales speak of knights in full-plate armor with long swords, many trials involved more humble armaments. For commoners, it might be quarterstaffs, shields, and cudgels. Sometimes, one combatant was given a disadvantage, such as a man fighting a woman with one hand tied behind his back, or fighting in a pit. The rules dictated fairness, yet often subtly reinforced social hierarchies. The choice of weapons was a crucial element, reflecting the status of the combatants and the legal framework, aiming to create an even playing field for God's judgment. Despite the brutal nature, trial by combat was governed by strict rules. Combatants swore an oath not to use sorcery or unfair tactics. The fight usually continued until one party yielded, was incapacitated, or in some cases died. If a fighter yielded, they were often considered guilty and could face further punishment, including execution or mutilation, or at the very least, lose their case and reputation. The rules ensured that the fight itself was orderly, a controlled environment for divine revelation, rather than uncontrolled chaos, distinguishing it sharply from a mere street brawl or personal vendetta. So who won these trials? While the romantic ideal suggests the innocent always prevailed, the reality was more complex. Often, the victory went to the physically stronger, more skilled, or better-equipped combatant. When champions were involved, this often meant victory for the side that could afford the most experienced fighter. It's a stark reminder that even with the belief in divine intervention, earthly factors played a significant role. The truth was decided not by abstract justice, but by a combination of skill, endurance, and brute force, challenging our modern perceptions of medieval justice. For the vanquished, defeat in trial by combat was catastrophic. If the accused lost, they were immediately judged guilty of the crime and faced the full legal penalties, often death by hanging or beheading or severe mutilation. Their family could also suffer social stigma and financial ruin. If the accuser lost, they were deemed to have made a false accusation, facing similar severe penalties for perjury. The champion who lost on behalf of another faced dishonor and sometimes physical punishment, a testament to the immense pressures on those who stepped into the lists. As the Middle Ages waned, so too did the reliance on trial by combat. The growing influence of Roman law, which emphasized evidence and witness testimony, began to challenge the divine ordeal. Legal scholars and even some clergy started to question whether God truly chose the most skilled fighter or the most righteous. The rise of centralized monarchies and sophisticated legal systems gradually pushed trial by combat into obsolescence. While it persisted in some forms and jurisdictions for centuries, its spiritual authority diminished, replaced by a more rational, evidence-based approach to justice. Despite its brutal nature and eventual decline, the concept of trial by combat left an indelible mark on Western legal thought and popular imagination. Its dramatic essence continues to captivate us in literature, film, and folklore, often romanticized into a pure test of good versus evil. Yet, understanding its historical reality reveals a fascinating, complex system born from a deeply religious society grappling with the elusive nature of truth. It reminds us of how far our notions of justice have evolved, from divine judgment on the battlefield to the meticulous pursuit of empirical evidence in our courtrooms today. The saga of trial by combat is a journey into a world profoundly different from our own, where the line between law, faith, and warfare blurred into a single, terrifying spectacle. It was a system born of deep-seated belief, a desperate attempt to uncover truth when all other methods failed. While crude and inherently biased towards the strong, it reveals the fundamental human desire for justice and the lengths societies would go to achieve it. From the solemn oaths to the clang of steel, these divine judgments offer a chilling glimpse into the medieval soul, where the ultimate verdict was etched not in parchment, but in blood and the will of a god believed to watch over every swing of the blade.